Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. Today, I'm thinking about the decisions that we make in the heat of the moment. These are the ones where something occurs in our lives and we have a knee-jerk reaction. I think most of us have had the moment where a relationship ends and we decide to radically change our appearance in some way, as if we're marking the beginning of a whole new chapter. We think that by making the change, we're moving forward and we're taking control. It actually reminds me of when an ill-fated relationship ended and I took myself off to Brent Cross shopping centre for an afternoon of some retail therapy. What happened was I bought some brightly coloured jumpers. These were clearly aimed at 5-year-olds. And what was happening was I was trying to be a person that I wasn't. I was trying to be a different version of myself that wore these types of clothes because that person probably wouldn't have ended up in the situation that I'd ended up in. If I remember correctly, I think he had ended it, and the reason that I was most upset was that he'd got there first. If you've listened to the show before, you'll have heard me talk about Steve, my beloved friend who's sadly no longer with us, and I obviously called him the moment that it had happened. And I remember him saying to me that the reason that I was so cross was because my pride was hurt at not having got in there first to do the dumping. He was right, of course, but I didn't want to think that. So off I stomped to Brent Cross to do some shopping, coming back with clothes that made me look like a kids' TV presenter. It's probably safer than a radical haircut, although I think back in the midst of time I have had a few dodgy perms, and I wonder now why I don't have lustrous locks. It doesn't have to be just about the end of a romantic relationship. It can be any moment where something's come to an end, and maybe that we didn't want that to happen, but not necessarily so. Why do we decide on a post-breakup haircut or image change? What's actually going on for us here? First of all, you won't be surprised to learn there's a lot of anxiety in the mix. So whether you chose the situation or not, you're likely to be feeling out of control. And there are all kinds of feelings floating around that you maybe are not aware of, or perhaps are a bit shocked by. We've talked before about our minds doing absolutely anything they need to try and avoid feeling anxious. We just can't bear it. So what we do is we try and take control over areas that we do think we have some kind of control over. So these areas include our appearance and our diet. Here we are at eating tubs of ice cream. And that's not just about self-pity. It's about deciding to do something, whether or not it's any good for us. We decide we're going to ask for a pixie cut, to dye our hair red, or to inhale a tub of Ben & Jerry's. And this works especially well if the situation we've just come out of meant that we couldn't do exactly that. Did your previous boyfriend or girlfriend not like the idea of you with red hair? Well, hand me the Clairol nice and easy. I used to have a boyfriend years ago who hated any bright lights in the house. And when we split up, even though it was my choice, I took great delight in having all the lights on whenever I could. Now, I admit that this wasn't very eco-friendly, but it did make me laugh and feel slightly smug that he had no more impact on me. I was taking back a little bit more of control. What's going on for us here is we're saying to the world that I'm in control of myself. It's a very clear message. Sometimes we do this consciously. So I know that with my lights example, it was absolutely a conscious choice. Sometimes, though, it's unconscious, and we can make decisions or choices that we end up regretting. Another reason that this happens is because our defence mechanisms have come out to play. And there are a couple here that are worth thinking about. We've got denial. So denial is where we refuse to accept facts that are absolutely clearly true. There's overwhelming evidence to state that these facts are true, but we will not accept that. And so when we're denying something in this situation, we're deciding that this isn't going to happen to us again because we've made ourselves into a completely new person. This doesn't happen to me because I'm not that old person anymore. I am somebody new. I'm denying that I am that person from before. Because here I am with this new haircut, or wardrobe, or makeup. It also gives us something else to think about. So here we're bringing in repression. So repression is where we squish away all those bits of ourselves that we don't want to think about. All that they go squished into our unconscious, and we don't have to have them in our conscious minds. What's going on here when we're repressing is I don't have to think about the psychological pain that I'm in, because what I'm actually thinking about is whether I go for platinum blonde or silver fox highlights. And this is much more fun and exciting to think about than actually the hurt and the upset that we're going through at that particular time. Because we've repressed that into our unconscious, and we can keep it nicely, tightly shut away there by considering what we're going to be discussing with our hairdresser. We've got rationalisation. Now, this is where we give ourselves reasons for why we're going to behave the way that we do. Rationalisation is one of my favourite and go-to defence mechanisms. So back to my switching on the lights example, I rationalise my having every light on because I felt I needed it. Now, this really wasn't true. I was doing it to make myself feel better. I'd been frustrated. I'd felt condescended and talked down to because I turned lights on, and now I felt I was getting some kind of control back. And in that case, I was rationalising my behaviour. The other one that comes into the mix here is sublimation. So sublimation is where we move our unacceptable impulses into something that's socially acceptable. So to give you an example, there's every possibility that you might want to go and punch your ex-partner or whoever or whatever it was that has upset you. And this isn't a good idea for many, many reasons. So what do? We push those unacceptable feelings into something that is acceptable. We get all our hair cut off. We get a piercing or a tattoo. We buy some new clothes. Or maybe we throw a lot of old clothes out. So what we're doing here is we're clearly demonstrating to the world that it's out with the old and in with the new. I'd wonder, is it the world that we're saying this to, or to ourselves? We can argue that there's reasons for both. There's a bit of pseudo-self-care going on here too. I can tell myself that I'm doing what I need to do to help myself feel better by getting a haircut, by buying new clothes, or by remodelling the living room. But realistically, you're just kicking the can down the road by trying to convince yourself that you don't need to think about things. Now, that doesn't mean to say that looking after yourself won't help you feel better. It will. Just consider whether it's the right way to look after yourself and not something you'll be regretting in weeks and months to come. My invitation to you this week is for you to consider where in your life you've gone out and got the post-breakup haircut or equivalent, and what you might have been trying to do with this. It puts me in mind a bit of Nancy Dell'Olio's bright red trouser suit that she wore after it was made public that her partner at the time, Sven-Göran Eriksson, who was the manager of the England football team at the time, he'd had a fling with Ulrika Jonsson. And Nancy Dell'Olio was invited to a party at Downing Street and wore an incredible suit. And she was quite clearly making a point here. But realistically, was she going overboard? She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She was extraordinarily beautiful and smart. She was a lawyer. And so in this case, it's a case of if something like this happens, if you find yourself in a similar situation, maybe take a step back and think, who am I trying to prove something to? What am I trying to prove? And is this going to help me? Now, additionally, give yourself some grace here. You're doing the best that you can. These can be really tricky waters to navigate. In these situations, a conversation with a much loved and trusted friend can prop you up far more than having all your hair chopped off. And even after thinking about all of this, you still go and get your hair cut? Absolutely go for it. It's always your choice, and don't let anyone, and most definitely not me, tell you that you shouldn't. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet and you can find the link for this in the show notes. If you'd like to have a chat with me about psychodynamics or whether I'm the right coach, supervisor or mentor for you, then click on the link that's also in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.